The Hattrick, 1938 World Cup, Sweden. This is the third World Cup and the second time the World Cup was hosted in Europe. France were the hosts. This tournament was also the second time that Sweden competed at the World Cup. They competed back in 1934 for the first time. And they had a great start by beating the runners-up of the 1930 tournament, Argentina, 3-2, but was knocked out in the quarterfinals by Germany 2-1. Sweden went into the 1938 World Cup qualifiers with the same manager that took them to the quarterfinals of the previous tournament, Joseph Nagy, who happened to be from Hungary and did play for a Hungarian team in his younger days, MTK Budapest. There's also a few returning players for Sweden who played at the 1934 tournament, such as Sven Jonassen, who is the first player for Sweden ever to score a goal at the World Cup. He actually scored 2 goals at the 1934 World Cup. Both of those goals was against Argentina and their 3-2 win. So I mentioned qualifiers, just like 1934, 1938 also had qualifying to get into the World Cup proper. Sweden was in the same group as Germany. I mentioned earlier, Germany did knock them out of the 1934 tournament. Finland was also in their group for qualifying, Finland making their World Cup qualifying debut. And Estonia was also in Sweden's group. Estonia and Sweden actually competed in the very first World Cup qualifying match, where Sweden won 6-2. Back in the 1934 World Cup qualifiers, Sweden and Estonia was joined by Lithuania with only one team from that group qualifying for the World Cup. In this group with Sweden, Germany, Estonia and Finland, 2 teams from this group would qualify, the top 2 nations in the group. Sweden will play in the first 2 matches. They're both home games for them. First game was against Finland at the Rosunda Stadium in Stockholm. 2 decades later, when Sweden becomes the hosts themselves in 1958, this stadium would host the final of the 1958 tournament between Sweden and Brazil. But back in 1937, it was a World Cup qualifying stadium for Sweden where they do beat Finland 4-0. All 4 goals for Sweden came in the second half. Lennart Bunk would get the opening goal for Sweden. He did score in Sweden's first World Cup qualifying game against Estonia back in 1934. So that's now his second World Cup qualifying goal. Sweden will get another goal 5 minutes later. In the 65th minute, Erik Persson would score. And then a couple minutes later, in the 68th minute, Kurt Swanstorm would make it 3-0 for Sweden. So that's 3 goals in 8 minutes there. The final goal for Sweden came in the 82nd minute. Lennart Bunk would score his second goal in this game and his third World Cup qualifying goal to end the scoring in this match. And Sweden will take 2 points and top the group. So that match took place on the 16th of June 1937. A couple of days later, Sweden will play another home game, this time against Estonia. Still same stadium as mentioned, in a Rosunda Stadium. The stadium's no longer around. It was demolished back in 2013, I believe. I mentioned it was the stadium for the final in 1958 between Brazil and Sweden. It also hosted a semi-final match between Brazil and France. So Sweden and Estonia, again, this was the first ever World Cup qualifying match back in 1934. And it's Estonia that starts off very well. Just 2 minutes in, George Simonsen would give Estonia the lead. And just 1 minute later, Estonia will double their lead against Sweden away thanks to a goal from Henrik Ukivi. Sweden do pull one goal back only a few minutes later. Gustav Josephson make it 2-1. Estonia still in the lead. But another World Cup qualifying goal from Leonard Bunk would level the scoring 2-2. And just 1 minute later, Gustav Josephson would score his second of the game. And Sweden will now go into the lead heading in to the second half. It's a great turnaround for Sweden there in the first half. In the second half, in the 49th minute, Sweden was awarded a penalty. Sven Jonasson, who I mentioned is Sweden's very first goal scorer at the World Cup, would make it 4-2. And then right at the end, in the 73rd, 77th and 84th minute, Gustav Wetterström will score a hat-trick, and that would be Sweden's first ever World Cup qualifying hat-trick and make the game 7-2 for Sweden. They do one better than they did back in 1934 against Estonia. And Sweden put themselves in a fantastic position to qualify for the 1938 World Cup. Sweden would only have one more game left to play, which would be the last game in this group. But before then, I mentioned the results in the other teams. I should also mention this. All four teams only played against each other once, either home or away. So not 2 games. And again, the top 2 teams would qualify for the World Cup. Finland will take on Germany next, where Germany did win 2-0 over Finland. And with that defeat, that pretty much meant Finland couldn't qualify for the World Cup. And to be sure of it, Finland did go up against Estonia. Finland played home in those last 2 games. Estonia do beat Finland 1-0. And that's how officially Finland couldn't qualify for the World Cup. And then Germany would take on Estonia. Estonia needed to win this game. Fortunately for them, they didn't. Germany won 4-1. That meant that both Germany and Sweden would qualify for the 1938 World Cup. And their match against each other, more for bragging rights than anything. So again, I mentioned Germany took on Sweden back in 1934, knocking them out of the tournament. Okay, this time around, this is a World Cup qualifying match. Again, both teams already qualified. Germany were the home team. The match took place in the Altener Stadium, now known as the Volkspark Stadium. It was also used for both the 1974 and 2006 World Cup. Most famously, though, for the 1974 World Cup in the group stage game between East Germany and West Germany, where East Germany won 1-0. And it was used for the most recent Euros in 2024, including that quarter-final match between Portugal and France, where France won on penalties. But in 1937, it's the final group game of Group 1, where Germany dominates Sweden 5-0. Otto Siffling, who did score in the World Cup in 1934 against Belgium, opened the scoring for Germany. Then, in the 8th minute, a couple minutes later, Fritz Sesban doubles the lead. That's 2-0 in the first half. And then in the second half, a goal from Helmut Schön would make it 3-0. Another goal from Otto Siffling, 4-0. And finally, another goal from Helmut Schön. He does become Germany's manager eventually in the 1960s, taking them to 2 World Cups finals and winning one of them in 74. But Yeah, that's how Germany beat Sweden. Again, this match didn't really matter too much. Both nations did qualify. So now this is how Sweden does at the World Cup. The 1938 World Cup, just like the 1934 World Cup, are the only two World Cups to not have a group stage. So in the round of 16 or round one, Sweden was originally supposed to go up against Austria. But Austria withdrew. Again, this would be because of Germany, because of the annexation of Austria. And because of this, no Austrian team competed at the 1938 World Cup, which meant Sweden will go straight through to the quarterfinals where they go up against a nation making their debut at the 1938 World Cup, Cuba. This match took place in the Stade du Front Carré. So, 9 minutes in, Sweden do take the lead thanks to a goal from Harry Anderson. Then, 22nd minute, Gustav Wetterström, who I mentioned scored Sweden's first World Cup qualifying hat-trick, adds another for Sweden, 2-0. Scores again in the 37th minute, 3-0. And then once again in the 44th minute, which then made him the first player for Sweden ever to score a hat-trick at the World Cup. That's amazing for him. Scored the first ever World Cup qualifying hat-trick for Sweden, and now the first hat-trick for Sweden at the World Cup proper. Great for him. And that's a 4-0 lead for Sweden over Cuba. Second half, there wasn't any goals till the 80th minute. Tor Keller, who did play for Sweden back in the 1934 tournament, scored the fifth goal for Sweden in this game. Harry Anderson would score another for Sweden in the 81st minute. That would be 6-0. And then a couple minutes later, on the 84th minute, Arne Nyberg would score the seventh goal for Sweden. And then the final goal was scored by Harry Anderson again. He will get his own hat-trick in this match to make the game go 8-0 for Sweden. Many firsts from this game. This will be the first time that a match had two hat-tricks within 90 minutes at the World Cup. This would also be the first time that two players in the same team would score hat-tricks in the same game. And Sweden will be the first nation to have two players to score a hat-trick at a World Cup. Also, the fact that Gustav Wetterström and Harry Anderson both scored a hat-trick for Sweden in the same match. This has never happened since. No other nation has done this. And this 8-0 victory for Sweden remains their biggest victory at the World Cup. So unfortunate for Cuba. But Sweden move on to their first ever semi-final at the World Cup. They take on Hungary at Parc des Princes, the home of PSG. And as filming this video, or recording this, now the two-time Champions League winners. Sweden have a great start in this game. 1 minute in, Arne Nyberg would score his second World Cup goal and give Sweden the lead. Unfortunately for Sweden, in the 19th minute, an own goal. This would be the third ever own goal at the World Cup and the second of this tournament. Sven Jacobsen would score the own goal and Hungary would equalise. Hungary do take the lead in the 37th minute. Paul Tickus would score for them. And just 2 minutes later, Gula Zengler had a fantastic World Cup in 1938. Made it 3-1 for Hungary. That's 3-1 in the first half. Another player for Hungary who again had a great World Cup in 1938, scored in the 65th minute to make it 4-1. That's Georgi Sorosi. That was his 5th World Cup goal. Then right at the end, in the 85th minute, Zengala again scored. That was also his 5th World Cup goal. Heavy defeat for Sweden, knocking them out, especially after such an amazing start. But it's unlucky for Sweden. That's how they got knocked out of the World Cup. These two would meet again 20 years later at the 1958 World Cup, where Sweden were the hosts. They would meet in the group stage. Hungary were the runners-up in the 1954 tournament. But Sweden did beat them on home soil 2-1. Sweden went on to play in the finals in 1958. They would meet later, but at World Cup qualifiers now, 2006 and 10, where Sweden won all 4 of those games, both home and away. Yeah, for 38, Hungary got the better of Sweden, knocking them out. There's still another match for Sweden to play, though. That would be the 3rd place playoff match. This would be only the 2nd 3rd place playoff game. Sweden went up against Brazil in the Parc des Sceaux in Bordeaux. Again, Sweden go off to a great start. In the 28th minute, Sven Jonassen, the first ever Swedish goal scorer, who scored his first goal in this tournament and his 3rd goal overall at a World Cup. And 10 minutes later, Arne Nyberg would also score his 3rd World Cup goal and double Sweden's lead. That's 2-0. However, Brazil do pull 1 goal back in the 44th minute. Romeu. So gave Brazil some hope there. In the 63rd minute and 74th minute, Leonardes, returning to the Brazilian team, would score the equaliser and give Brazil the lead. Leonardes scored his 7th goal of that tournament. He would become the top goal scorer of the 1938 tournament and Brazil's first ever top scorer at the World Cup. Then a few minutes later, in the 80th minute now, Jose Palacio would finish the scoring in this game. Brazil beat Sweden 4-2. Brazil finished 3rd in this tournament. Sweden 4th. I mentioned earlier that Brazil and Sweden do go up against each other in the finals of the 1958 tournament. But first, the next tournament in 1950, the first tournament to take place after the events of World War II, Brazil were the hosts. Brazil and Sweden would meet each other in the final group phase, where Brazil beat Sweden 7-1. Sweden would end up finishing 3rd in that tournament, where Brazil were the runners-up. Okay, now for the 1958 tournament, where Sweden were the hosts. Brazil and Sweden meet in the final. Brazil beat Sweden 5-2. And Brazil kind of did what happened to them in Brazil in 1950. They kind of did it to Sweden in 1958, beating the hosts in pretty much technically the final. In 1950, there wasn't a final, but in 1958, there was a final. So Sweden are the only nation to ever lose a final at home. That wasn't the last time these two nations do meet. They meet again 20 years later in 1978, where Sweden does get their first draw against Brazil in a competitive game. They meet again in 1990, where Brazil win 2-1. And they were in the same group in 1994, where they drew 1-1, but the second time they competed, and this time would be the semi-final, Brazil got the best of Sweden again, beating them 1-0. I mentioned in plenty of videos I've done before discussing both Sweden and Brazil that if Brazil was not in World Cups. Sweden would probably have won two, maybe would have won two World Cups. You never know. But yeah, all the competitive matches, Sweden do lose to Brazil. Another nation that Sweden do play against is Germany, and again, a little bit more fortunate for them, at least in 1958, because they do beat Germany then in the semi-finals, I think it was, to then go up against Brazil. But for the most part, again, I think the Germans usually get the best of Sweden as well. So it's unfortunate. I mean, Brazil and Germany, probably the two most recognizable teams at the World Cup, two of the biggest histories of, between those two nations. There's like 12 World Cup finals between them. Yeah, and unfortunately for Sweden, they do bump into both of them at World Cups. Sweden have qualified for the 2026 World Cup. A very tight one for them. Just about beat Poland right at the end to qualify for 2026. They are in the same group as Japan, Tunisia, and another nation that's been extremely unlucky at World Cups, and that's the Netherlands. So we'll see how they do. As filming this video, the World Cup is next week. But for 1938, this is the first time that Sweden has reached a semi-final at the World Cup. First time they made it into the Final Four. And yes, even though they did only have to play one match to reach the Final Four, they still did. So it's the first Swedish team to make it there. This was their first of 4 Final Four appearances. So Sweden, 1938. Thanks for watching, listening. Appreciate it as usual. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, it's bye for now.